You know that feeling when you've done everything right and it still doesn't work? You followed the plan. You put in the hours. You used every technique you know, but you have nothing to show for it. That's not a metaphor. That's a Tuesday night on the Sea of Galilee. Around 28 AD, a fisherman named Simon is standing knee-deep in water. The same Simon is cleaning the net. The same Simon is thinking about how he will tell his family that the lake gave him nothing. Here's what makes this story fascinating. The most important catch in the Bible doesn't come from skill. It doesn't come from timing or effort. It comes from the one moment a professional stops trusting his expertise. The same Simon bets everything on a single sentence from someone who should know nothing about fishing. And what happens next doesn't just fill a boat, it rewrites the same Simon's entire life. Because the empty net was never the problem. It was the prerequisite. To understand what's happening in Luke chapter 5, you need to know what fishing actually looked like. This was not recreational. This was an industry. The Sea of Galilee was the economic engine of the entire region. The fishing trade was so profitable that the ruling tetrarchs invested heavily in its infrastructure. Fishermen paid annual taxes per boat and per catch. This was serious commercial work. The same Simon and his partners were not hobbyists. They owned boats and employed hired workers. The tool of that trade was the tremel net, a remarkable piece of engineering. Picture 3 layers of netting stitched together along a single head rope and foot rope. When a fish swam through the first outer wall, it hit the loose inner net and got trapped. These nets were made of linen. During the day, fish could see them and swim around them. Though trammel net fishing was done exclusively at night, a crew of 4 or 5 men would row out. They'd lay the net parallel to the shore, then use a second boat to splash and drive the fish. When morning came, the fish was sorted, nets were washed, and the whole system was hung to dry. So when Luke tells us that the same Simon and his partners had toiled all night and caught nothing, this is not one failed attempt. This is an entire shift of hours of rowing, laying, splashing, and hauling. Now, the Greek word Luke uses for toiled is kopiao, and this word doesn't just mean worked. It comes from the root kopos, which means exhausting labor, the kind of effort that leaves you physically spent. It carries the idea of being beaten down by fatigue. It's the same word Jesus uses in Matthew 11:28 when he says, "Come to me, all you who kopiao." Luke is painting a picture. These are not men who tried and gave up. These are men who poured out everything. They were left depleted, empty-handed, and aching. They didn't just fail. They were exhausted by the failure. And it's right here, in the middle of that exhaustion, that Jesus shows up. Luke tells us that the crowd was pressing in on him so tightly, pushing against him to hear the word of God. So he stepped into the same Simon's boat, the one sitting idle with its empty nets. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. Think about that for a second. Jesus doesn't commandeer a successful operation. He borrows the boat of a man who just failed. The empty boat becomes a place of teaching. That's not an accident. But what comes next is where the whole story turns. After Jesus finishes teaching, he looks at the same Simon and says something that sounds unexpected. Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. It's the middle of the day now. The sun is up. The fish have retreated to deeper, cooler water. Everything about this command contradicts the same Simon's lifetime of experience. And here's where the Greek gets really interesting. The same Simon's response uses a word that only Luke uses. In classical Greek, this word was used for military commanders, government overseers, even the president of the Athenian assembly. The same Simon is saying, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your rhema I will let down the nets." That word, rhema. In the New Testament, there are two primary Greek words translated word. Logos refers to the broad, written, enduring Word of God. But rhema is different. It's the word Luke uses when the angel speaks to Mary and she responds, "Let it be to me according to your rhema." It's the word used when Simeon says, "Now you are dismissing your servant according to your rhema." Every time rhema appears in Luke's gospel, it marks a moment where someone receives a direct, personal word from God. So the same Simon isn't saying, "Well, you're the teacher, so I'll give it a try." He's saying, "Everything I know tells me this won't work, but on the basis of your specific, personal word, I'll do it." That's not casual obedience. That's a man choosing to override his own expertise with trust. And the nets go down. In broad daylight, in the wrong conditions, against every principle of the trade. And then the text says, they enclosed a great number of fish, and their nets were breaking. The Greek word Luke uses for enclosed is synkleo. It has the prefix syn, meaning together. It suggests surrounding completely, closing in from every side. This isn't a good catch. This is an overwhelming haul. The same Simon signals to his partners, and they come and fill both boats so full that they begin to go under. A veteran fisherman who spent over 20 years on these waters devoted his life to studying these methods. Based on what we know, scholars estimate this was an extraordinary haul, far beyond what a crew would normally catch in a week. In one cast, in the middle of the day, when everything said it couldn't be done. If you're watching this and something about this resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you did everything right and still came up empty, you're not alone, and you might want to stick around, because what happens to the same Simon next changes everything. Maybe you know what that feels like. A woman named Joel sits in her car in the parking lot of a restaurant where she's worked for 6 years. The same Joel just got passed over for a promotion she was overqualified for, again. The same Joel thinks about all the nights she stayed late, all the systems she built, all the problems she solved that nobody noticed. Maybe I'm just not enough. The same Joel says to nobody. Now here's what's fascinating about the same Simon's reaction. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't pump his fist. He doesn't count the fish. He falls down at Jesus' feet and says, "Depart from me, for I am a humble man, O Lord." And notice, he doesn't call Jesus epistatus anymore. The word shifts to Kyrios, Lord. Why would a miraculous catch make someone feel humbled? Because of where the miracle happened. This wasn't a healing in a temple. This wasn't a public confrontation. This was the same Simon's domain. Fishing was the one thing he knew better than anyone. And Jesus just demonstrated authority over the one area of life where the same Simon was the expert. When divine power shows up in your area of competence, it doesn't just impress you, it exposes you. The same Simon suddenly sees the distance between what he can do and what God can do, and it terrifies him. This is the same pattern you find all the way back in Isaiah 6. When Isaiah sees the Lord, his first response is, "Woe is me, for I am undone." There's something about a genuine encounter with divine holiness that makes human confidence collapse. Not because God is trying to shame anyone, but because the light is so bright that every shadow becomes visible. And the Greek grammar of Jesus' response carries something beautiful. When he says, "Do not be afraid," it literally means, stop being fearful. The same Joel sits in her car in the parking lot. She just got passed over for a promotion she was overqualified for, again. The same Joel thinks about all the nights she stayed late, all the systems she built, all the problems she solved that nobody noticed. Maybe I'm just not enough, the same Joel says to nobody. What Joel doesn't know yet is that the empty net was never the final chapter. Because look at what Jesus says to the same Simon after the catch. "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching people alive." That phrase, catching alive, is a single Greek word, zogreo. It only appears twice in the entire New Testament. It's built from two roots, zoe, meaning life, and agrio, meaning to catch or hunt. In classical Greek, it was a military term for taking prisoners of war alive, rather than killing them. But in 2 Timothy, Paul uses it to describe people being held captive by the enemy and needing to be set free. So when Jesus says the same Simon will guide people, there's a deliberate tension in the word. This is the exact opposite of what happens to fish. A fisherman catches fish alive, and they die. The word itself contains the gospel in miniature. And Jesus delivers this commission to a man who, 10 minutes ago, was washing empty nets. Notice the structure the author has built. The same Simon begins the story as a fisherman. The word that began as a professional title, "Master, we toiled all night," becomes a confession of faith. And this isn't a one-time event. Luke is building a structure that spans the entire biblical narrative. In John 21, after the resurrection, we find almost the exact same scene. The disciples have gone back to fishing, but here's what's different. In Luke 5, when Peter recognizes who Jesus is, he says, "Depart from me." Between those two miraculous catches of fish stands the entire ministry of Jesus. The sacrifice, the restoration. The man who once said, "Go away," now says, "I'm coming." The empty net is the same, the response is transformed. "Go away, I'm coming." In Luke 5, the nets were tearing apart. In John 21, 153 large fish and the net holds. What God starts in your most exhausted, most inadequate moment, He finishes with a net that doesn't tear. The catch was just how He met the one who would give him a life worth living.